Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome to Section 3, Lesson 3. Section 3, we've been covering tajweed, and today is Lesson 3, and we're going to be covering the rules related to Nun Sakin and Tanween, also known as Ahkam and Nun Sakinah and Tanween. Today's video is part 1. I'm only going to be covering Izhar and Ikhfa. Idgham and Iqlab, the next two rules. There's a total of 4 rules. First 2 rules I'm going to be covering today. The next 2 rules I'm going to be covering in part 2. So let's get started. By the way, I know this has been a long time coming and I appreciate your patience, but there is a method to my madness. I want to make sure that your foundation is very solid before I move on to slightly more advanced topics. On the agenda today, we're going to do a quick review of the previous lesson. Then, as usual, I'm going to ask you to do your warm-ups. We're going to go review our letter collections, and then we're going to go into the meat of today's presentation, which is rules related to Nun Sakin and Tanween, also known as Ahkam and Nun Sakinah and Tanween. And I'll give you some short exercises within the presentation, as well as give you an overview of the exercise videos that are related to this lesson that are going to be up and coming, as well as a few of the future videos that I'm going to be doing. So let's get started. As a review, last time we discovered or talked about 2 different topics, lahan khafi, lahan jali. Lahan khafi means a minor mistake, and it is a mistake that is made while reciting the Quran that does not necessarily change the meaning of the Quran, but tends to reduce the beauty of the Quran. What ends up happening is, because you're making this mistake, the Quran is not as beautiful as it should be. You're not giving the Quran its due rights when it comes to the beauty of the Quran. And this mistake definitely should be corrected. And if you want the details of what I mean by should and must, you can go watch the video of lahan khafi, lahan jali, because these words are kind of charged, especially for adults. Adults tend to be extremely hard on themselves when they're making mistakes. Reason being that, oh my God, this is the Quran, this is the book of Allah, and no doubt about it, this is a very serious topic. But understand, especially when you're a beginner, you are going to make these mistakes. So despite the fact that continuing to make these mistakes is highly undesirable, it's makruh, you should be attempting to correct them, and that is the best you can do. So don't beat yourself up. Okay, if you want, you can go back and review the previous videos of lahan khafi and lahan jali. What is lahan jali? It means a major mistake. And it is a mistake that is if you make it while reciting the Quran, it tends to change the meaning of the Quran, or at times it can even make the words nonsensical. So one of the examples that I gave in the last video was qalb versus kalb. Qalb means heart and kalb means dog. So that's slight variation. Qalb, if you don't know how to pronounce the qaf, and if you don't know how to pronounce the kaf, kalb. Qalb means heart, kalb means dog. So obviously, if you're reciting a word in the Quran and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is referring to the qalb or the heart, and you accidentally or mispronounce it as kalb, then what you're saying is really dog instead of heart, which is either within the context can become nonsense, or it can change the meaning of the Quran, which is very bad. Now, these mistakes must be corrected. Again, those words of should and must are very charged, especially for adults. So go back and watch the previous video on what exactly I elaborate on what I mean by must and should within these contexts. But continuing to make these mistakes unknowingly is highly undesirable, meaning the best you can really do as adults, especially most of my videos are tailored for adult learners, the best you can do is, you can continue to correct your mistakes or attempt to correct your mistakes. However, if you knowingly make these mistakes, meaning you don't make any effort to correct your mistakes, and despite the fact that you know that you're making this mistake and you don't attempt to correct them, this can become a major sin or even lead to kufr. Now, what I want you to do is, if you want a bigger overview of what I mean by this, go ahead and watch the previous video. I think that's enough for a review for today. On to the warm-ups. As usual, go either watch the longer version of the warm-ups video or the short version of the warm-ups video. I'll provide a link in the description below. Please don't skip. Warm-ups are essential. Now, as you are starting to discover slightly more advanced topics, including Ahkam and Nun Sakinah and Tanween, you will realize why I have been emphasizing on these warm-ups. These warm-ups are important, so please don't skip. Go ahead, do your warm-ups. As usual, we're going to be going over our letter collections: throat letters, lip letters, tafkhim letters, idgham letters, mud letters, and qalqala letters. And we're going to be memorizing them. So, do you remember what the throat letters are? Because throat letters are going to become very important today. What are the 6 throat letters? Those are Hamza, Ha, Ain, Ha, Ghain, Kha. Again, Hamza, Ha, Ain, Ha, Ghain, Kha. You should have these memorized by now. The lip letters is a collection of 4 letters whose makhraj and exit point, as throat letters are those letters whose makhraj or exit point or point of articulation is within the throat. The lip letters are those whose articulation point is on the lips, and the 4 lip letters are Fa, Waw, Ba, and Mim. Tafkhim letters, those are letters that are always pronounced heavy, are Sad, Dad, La, Va, Ghain, Kha, and Qaf. You're going to be pronouncing these letters as if your mouth is full of food or as if you're an opera singer. And one of the warm-ups, like I said, keep focusing on the warm-ups, is pronouncing or making letters heavy. In this case, Slad, Dad, La, Va, Ghain, Kha, and Qaf. Notice how I'm pronouncing them. I'm slightly exaggerating it for you to be able to hear it. But notice how I'm as if I'm an opera singer, or as if my mouth is full of food, Sad, Dad, La, Va, Ghain, Kha, and Qaf. These are letters of tafkhim. Idgham letters can be given or can be remembered by a very simple, I guess it's not a mnemonic, but it's a made-up word. It's yarmaloon. Ya, Ra, Mim, Lam, Waw, and Noon. Yarmaloon are idgham letters. Again, letters of idgham, and this letter collection will become a lot more important in part 2 of the video that I'm doing today. Today is part 1. Part 2 is going to be coming up. Excuse me. Mud letters are 3 letters that extend the sound, and those are Alif, Waw, and Ya. That was covered in a previous lesson. And qalqala letters are those that are bounced or echoed slightly when they have a sukoon on them. And those can be remembered by Jad Qutub or Qutub Jad, Qaf, Ta, Ba, Jim, and Dal. These letters, when they have a sukoon on them, you have to bounce the sound a little. And that's what qalqala means, to bounce or to echo. Qutub Jad, those letters, those 5 letters, if they have a sukoon on them, you have to bounce the sound a little. That was our letter collections. On to today's lesson. We are going to have to review a little bit of what Tanween is. This was covered in one of the previous lessons, especially when I went over Tanween. I don't remember exactly off the top of my head what that previous lesson was. But we have to do a review of Tanween. And what is Tanween? It means noonation, or to add a noon. What happens is you add a second diacritic, and that second diacritic indicates that a noon sound has to be added. That indicates the presence of a noon sound. And there are 3 types of Tanween. If you remember, we covered it last time when we were reviewing Tanween quite a while ago. Almost a year, maybe 2 years ago at this point, I think. Even longer, I think. The 3 types of Tanween are Tanween al-Fath or Fathatan, when you have 2 fathas on top of a letter. Tanween al-Kasr, also known as Kasratan, when you have 2 kasras below a letter. Or Tanween al-Dhamm or Dhammatan, when you have 2 dhammas on top of a letter. You pronounce this as if the Nun Sakin is present. What do I mean by that? This Tanween is basically an indication that the Nun Sakin lies at the end of the word. Now, Tanween sounds like as if the Nun Sakin, but instead of being written that way, it has a double vowel. Fathatan, Dhammatan, Kasratan present. As you can see below, Ta Fatha Nun Sukun is pronounced what? Ta Fatha Nun Sukun, which is this right here. Ta Fatha Nun Sukun is tan. Ta Fathatan is equivalent. Ta Fatha Nun Sukun tan. Ta Fathatan tan. Similarly, Ta Kasra Nun Sukun tin. Ta Kasratan tin. Ta Dhamma Nun Sukun tun. Ta Dhammatan tun. Tan, tin, tun. These 3 are equivalent to each other. But instead of writing the Nun Sukun, Ta Dhamma Nun Sukun, we add a Tanween al-Dhamm, Instead of doing ta kasra noon sukun, we add tanween al-kasr, and instead of adding ta fatha noon sukun, we add tanween al-fath, or fathatan, kasratan, and dhammatan respectively. I hope that's clear. What we're learning today, and this is why these rules related to Nun Sakin and Tanween, are the shared rules between Nun Sakin and Tanween, meaning what and how you're supposed to be pronouncing, my mistake, how you're supposed to be pronouncing the kasratan, fathatan, dhammatan, or Nun Sakin, which means rules related to Nun Sakin and Tanween, or Ahkam and Nun Sakinah wa Tanween are what we're covering today. We're going to be covering 2 rules related to today, but that's what we're going to be covering today. So what are the rules related to Nun Sakin and Tanween? These are the rules on how the Nun Sakin and Tanween should be pronounced. And basically, the reason that we have to cover this is the way you pronounce the Nun Sakin and Tanween changes. It gets modified depending on the letter immediately following the Nun Sakin or Tanween. We'll go over examples of this just a bit. Now, what letter is immediately following that Nun Sakin or Tanween determines it, but there are 4 rules, meaning of the 28 letters that are within the Arabic alphabet, the letter immediately following the Nun Sakin or Tanween can be broken down into 4 different rules, which is Ahkam and Nun Sakinah and Tanween. Now, which letter denotes which rule will be discussed in turn. So for example, if it's Izhar, there's a collection of letters. When those collection of letters, which is 6 letters, are immediately following the Nun Sakin or Tanween, then it becomes, the pronunciation becomes Izhar. Those are throat letters, and we'll cover that. And which letters are related to Ikhfa, Idgham, Iqlab will be discussed in turn. So let's go into the first rules. The first few rules. By the way, there are 4 rules, like I said just a second ago. Izhar is the first one that we're going to be discovering today. We're going to talk about Ikhfa today as well. Idgham is further broken down into 2 sub-rules. There is Idgham bi-ghunna and Idgham bi-ghayr ghunna. We'll go over that in the next lesson. And Iqlab, which is the final rule, and we'll go over that as well in the next, which is going to be part 2 of this video. Now, the 3 ways or the 3 types of written tanween and how the Nun Sakin was also written can also help you determine which category of the Nun Sakin or Tanween is being used, or which rule related to Nun Sakin or Tanween is being used. And we'll discover those each in turn. Now, what I want you to do is, as we go over each of these 4 rules, Izhar, Ikhfa, Idgham, and Iqlab, I want you to observe how the Nun Sakin is written and how the Tanween is written. It's kind of important, especially this is why I've been going over and asking you to read from the Uthmani script. The Uthmani script makes this very, very clear, because the way the Tanween is written really depends on whether you have to do Izhar, Ikhfa, Idgham, and Iqlab. The way the Tanween is written changes, and we will go over how what that change looks like. Or even the Nun Sakin, how it's written, it changes depending on which rule applies. Okay? So obviously, because it's related to Nun Sakin and Tanween, the way Nun Sakin is written and the way the Tanween is written, regardless of whether it's Fathatan, Dhammatan, or Kasratan, differs slightly depending on which rule is being followed or which rule is going to be applicable. On to the first rule today. The very first rule is the Izhar rule. Now, what is the meaning of the Izhar rule? Izhar means to make clear or to express. That's the literal meaning of the word. And there are 6 letters, and these are also the throat letters that you have been memorizing constantly in your warm-ups. So I hope by now these 6 letters are very, very clear to you and you have them memorized by heart, which are the throat letters that you know by heart by now. And these are also the letters of Izhar. And they are Hamza, Ha, Ain, Ha, Ghain, Kha. And as part of the self-test, you will be expected to memorize and know these by heart. Okay? So, now, on to the exact definition of the Izhar rule. When the letter that is immediately after the Nun Sakin or Tanween is one of these 6 letters, which is one of the 6 throat letters that you see on your screen right now, then the noon sound, which is whether the noon sound on the tanween or whether the noon sound in the Nun Sakin, will be pronounced clearly, and it will be pronounced without any merging or extending of the sound. Now, what do we mean by that? We will go over in just a second. Here are the examples of Izhar. Now, let's go ahead and go over these. Notice this word has a Nun Sakin, and immediately following this Nun Sakin is one of the 6 throat letters, which is Hamza. This is a Tanween al-Fath or Fathatan, and immediately following these Fathatan, there is a throat letter, which is the Ha. This is an example of Kasratan, and immediately following these Kasratan, this is a throat letter, which is Ain. And again, immediately following these Dhammatan is another throat letter, is Ha. And same thing, Nun Sakin and Ghain, Dhammatan and Kha. Hamza, Ha, Ain, Ha, Ghain, Kha. Meaning immediately following the Tanween or immediately following the Nun Sakin, it's one of the 6 throat letters. So let's go ahead and recognize how we pronounce. Now, one of the ways that I have noticed that people make this mistake is they sometimes confuse the two, and I will explain the confusion of Izhar versus Ikhfa. This is one of the warm-ups, I'm forgetting actually which warm-up it is, but it's one of the warm-ups that I ask you to do at the beginning of every video, which is you have to hold the sound within your nose a little bit, right? But remember, in Izhar, you're not supposed to hold your sound. That's Ikhfa. In Izhar, what you're supposed to do is you are supposed to pronounce it clearly without extending the sound. Now, I am going to pronounce each of these in turn, and I want you to listen to how I'm pronouncing, especially the Nun Sakin and especially the Tanween. So let's go ahead. Min ahli. Whoops. Let's go back. That's an accident. Min ahli. Nuhan hadayna. نوحا هدينا يومئذ عني يومئذ عني نار حامية نار حامية من غسلين من غسلين كرة خاسرة كرة خاسرة. Now, let's go ahead and review each of these in turn, and I will tell you what the difference is between Izhar and Ikhfa. Right now, if this was a letter other than a Hamza or one of the 15 Ikhfa letters, which are going to be coming up, then I would have to hold this sound, this Nun sound in my nose a little bit. If you want, you can go back and rewind how I pronounced it, but I will pronounce first correctly, and then I will present to you how to pronounce it incorrectly, and you will notice the difference. First, I'm going to pronounce it correctly. Min ahli. Notice the Nun sound I pronounced clearly and did not extend it. Now I'm going to pronounce it incorrectly. I'm going to extend this Nun sound, which is incorrect, by the way. Min ahli. Notice that Nun I held in my nose a little bit, and that's called Ikhfa, but this is not an example of Ikhfa. This is one of the 6 letters of Izhar, which is Hamza. Therefore, you have to not hold the Nun in your nose, you have to pronounce it clearly. And you have to immediately say it. You have to say it like Min ahli. Now let's go over this one. Again, I'm going to first pronounce it correctly, then pronounce it incorrectly. I want you to hear the difference. First, let's go over correctly. Nuhan hadayna. Now I'm going to pronounce it incorrectly. نوحا هدينا. Now notice when I'm pronouncing it, I was holding it in my nose, and that is incorrect. Because why? This ha fathatan han has to be pronounced clearly without holding in your nose anything, because this is one of the 6 letters, or one of the throat letters, or one of the 6 letters of Izhar. So, Nuhan Hadayna. This I'm going to pronounce correctly first. Yawma idhin ani. Now I'm going to pronounce it incorrectly. Yawma idhin ani. Now that idhin, if I was to hold it in my nose, would be incorrect because it's ain, and that is incorrect. So now let's go ahead and pronounce the rest of these 3 correctly. And I want you to imagine for yourself what incorrectly would be, and see if you can pronounce it after me correctly. Because basically, it is not a good idea to be, practice incorrectly. Always be practicing correctly, but I just wanted to make sure that you have a clear distinction of what is correct versus incorrect in the case of Izhar. Narun hamiyatun min ghislin karratun khasiratun. Okay, I hope that's clear. Those are examples, 6 examples of Izhar. Now, again, whenever Izhar is pronounced, one thing that I wanted you to observe is how Nun Sakin is written. And we will go over. Now notice when you're having Izhar, the Nun Sakin has a sukoon on it. Now we will distinguish it with the examples of Ikhfa. Notice how this fathatan are written, these dhammatan are written, and these kasratan are written, especially this Nun Sakin. Nun Sakin has a sukoon on top of it. But when we go to Ikhfa, you will see, number 1, the Nun Sakin will not have a sukoon on it, and you will know that when Nun Sakin does not have a sukoon on it, the sukoon is there, but the absence of the sukoon means you're supposed to do Ikhfa. And again, ha, fathatan, they're written on top of each other, but when we get to Ikhfa examples, we will contrast them in a little bit. The fathatan will be written slightly running away from each other. And the same thing with kasratan. The kasratan will be written slightly running away from each other. Right now, these fathatan and these kasratan are right on top of each other. Oh, by the way, here is an example right there. Ghislin, and you see these kasratan, they're running away from each other. But notice this is at the end of this word, and this is not included in Ahkam and Nun Sakinah and Tanween at the moment. The one that we're really concerned with on this word is Nun Sakin here, min ghislin. Right? So keep notice of how this dhammatan is written, how the fathatan is written. We'll contrast these with Ikhfa examples just a bit. On to Ikhfa. What is Ikhfa? Ikhfa's literal meaning is to conceal or to hide. That's the literal meaning of the word Ikhfa. Now, I'm not expecting you to memorize the letters of Ikhfa, but here they are. There are ta, tha, jim, dal, dha, dhal, jim, dal, dhal, za, sin, shin, sad, dad, ta, va, fa, qaf, and kaf. Now, just like with Izhar, when the letter immediately following the Nun Sakin or Tanween is one of these 15 letters. With Izhar, how many letters were there? There were 6. With Ikhfa, there are 15 letters. When it's one of these 15 letter collections, one of these 15 letters in this collection, then the Nun sound will be hidden in the nose. And this is part of warm-up number 13. This is why I keep asking you over and over again, remember to do your warm-ups, Without these warm-ups, you will have trouble remembering, especially when you're pronouncing it in fluency, and how to do this. So do the warm-ups. Therefore, when the letter immediately following after Nun Sakin or Tanween is one of these 15, then you have to hide the Nun sound in your nose a little bit. I will show you what that means in just a second. Okay, these are 6 examples of Ikhfa. And they go as follows. Antum. Now notice I held the Nun in my nose in order to make sure that I do this Ikhfa. The reason is that this Nun Sakin, the immediately following this Nun Sakin is one of the 15 letters of Ikhfa. Therefore, I have to hold this noon in my nose a little bit, and notice this noon does not have a sukoon on it. The sukoon exists. The sukoon is not written for you to basically give you a visual cue, visual clue that you're supposed to do ikhfa here. Antum. Next we have ma thajjajan. Ma thajjaja. Now notice Hamza fathatan an, but I am holding this an sound in my nose a little bit because the letter immediately following is tha. Therefore, it is one of the 15 letters of Ikhfa. Therefore, I have to hold this fathatan in my nose a little bit. And notice these fathatan are slightly running away from each other. There's two fathas right here, but they are running away from each other, letting you know that, hey, you're supposed to be doing ikhfa here, right? This gives you your first visual cue, first visual clue, and the next letter immediately following gives you your second visual clue or visual cue what you're supposed to be doing. Ma thajjaja. Next we have musin janafa. Again. Musin janafa. Next we have qinwanun daniya. There's a specific reason that I left this example here. I want you to think about this Nun Sakin for a bit. We will go over why we're pronouncing this Nun Sakin as Izhar. We will go over, it's called Izhar al-Mutlaq. We will go over in today's lesson. But the rule actually this pronunciation of this rule is actually this Nun, Dhammatan, Nun, and Dal, Nun Daniya, because Dal is one of the letters of Ikhfa. Qinwanun Daniya. Sab'an shidada. Sab'an shidada. Shay'in qadir. Shay'in qadir. Notice how I'm pronouncing the Hamza kasratan. I'm holding in my nose because this is Ikhfa. Now I'm going to first pronounce this one incorrectly. If I was to pronounce it incorrectly, it would be antum. And that is incorrect because I did not hold that noon sound in my nose because the ta is one of the letters of Ikhfa. Therefore, I have to pronounce it correctly. And what is correct? It is antum. Same here. If I was to pronounce it incorrectly, it would be ma'an sajjaja. That is incorrect. The correct way is ma'an sajjaja. Notice I held this Hamza fathatan in my nose. Musin janafa. I have to hold this Sad kasratan in my noon. Nun daniya. Qinwanun daniya. Sab'an shidada. I'm exaggerating slightly, but I'm holding the noon sound in my nose a little bit, and that is the rule of Ikhfa. We're going to be going over a lot of examples in following exercise videos. I will be creating a lot of example and exercise videos. Keep watching for more. Today, I also wanted to cover al-Izhar al-Mutlaq. This was one of the examples of al-Izhar al-Mutlaq. Qinwanun daniya. We went over al-Izhar and al-Ikhfa, but there is an exception that exists in the Quran. Then that exception is called Izhar al-Mutlaq. And there are 4 words in the Quran that are always pronounced with Izhar. Al-Izhar al-Mutlaq means, or Izhar al-Mutlaq means showing absolutely or always showing. And what it means is, whenever you see one of these four words that you see on your screen right now, the Nun Sakin in this case, the Nun Sakin in this case, the Nun Sakin in this case, and the Nun Sakin in this case, will always be pronounced with Izhar. The words are qinwanun, sinwanun, ad-dunya, and bunyanahu. Whenever you see these four words in the Quran, you have to do Izhar. Now you must be thinking, oh my God, here is an exception. I'm never going to remember. This is actually fairly easy. It's only applicable to these four words. You don't have to worry about any other exceptions to this. Okay? This happens in only the following words, al-Izhar al-Mutlaq, these four. And even if you can't remember, I'm going to ask you to memorize them. This is going to be on the self-test. Well, actually, no, memorizing them is not going to be on the self-test. But basically being able to pronounce them is going to be on the self-test. It's these four words, and even if you don't remember or you forget somehow, you will see that Nun Sakin has a sukun on it. Therefore, it'll tell you, this will be your clue, that despite the fact that one of the word following is actually not one of the words of Izhar. What are the 6 letters of Izhar? Sorry, I kept saying word, it's a letter. What are the 6 letters of Izhar? The 6 letters of Izhar are the same as the throat letters, which are Hamza, Ha, Ain, Ha, Ghain, Kha. Wow, Noon, and Ya are obviously not one of those 6. In this case, Nun Sakin is followed by Wow, but this is still pronounced Qinwan. This is an exception, and it occurs only in the following words, but one way is to remember these 4, or when you see these words, you say the Nun Sakin, you will immediately know that this is Izhar, despite the fact that the letter following is not one of the letters of Izhar. This is an exception, and it's called al-Izhar al-Mutlaq. Let's go over quickly and pronounce these. Qinwanun, sinwanun, ad-dunya, bunyanahu. Those are the 4 letters of al-Izhar, 4 words of al-Izhar al-Mutlaq, which means to show absolutely remember this exception. It will be on the self-test. So what's about the self-test is going to be entirely from examples that will be demonstrated in the exercise supplements videos that I'm going to be creating, or the Qaida Nuraniya video that I'm going to be creating after this. So look out for those videos. In conclusion, what did we learn today? We learned 2 rules related to Ahkam and Nun Sakinah and Tanween, which the 2 rules that we learned today, were Izhar and Ikhfa. We will be going over the next 2 rules will be Idgham and Iqlab, which is going to be part 2 of this video, but the next set of videos, actually the next video will not be about Idgham and Iqlab. The next set of videos will be exercise videos related to Izhar and Ikhfa. I want you to get very, 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 very comfortable with Izhar and Ikhfa. The reason is, one of the rules that makes your tajweed beautiful, is Ahkam and Nun Sakinah and Tanween. If you follow Ahkam and Nun Sakinah and Tanween, and number 2, Ahkam al-Mudud, we will go over Ahkam al-Mudud later. But if you follow those 2 set of rules and those 2 set of rules well, Ahkam al-Mudud are rules related to elongation, and Ahkam and Nun Sakinah and Tanween are those rules that are related to Nun Sakin and Tanween. If you are good in these 2 set of rules, your tajweed will become beautiful. So we will go over a lot of exercise videos. After all of that, we will cover Idgham, Iqlab, and then we will cover Iltiqa as-Sakinain. What do we mean by that? We will cover in a future video. And as usual, Jazakallah khair for watching. Please like the video, comment on it if you would like any clarification, subscribe and share to help me spread this knowledge. I will see you next time. Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.